What's the most devious secret you've ever had to keep? Many years ago, while I was attending university, I took a class on the history of World War II. It was quite informative, and the professor had been able to secure several guest lecturers who made the class absolutely riveting. One of them was a man who had worked to recover European cultural artifacts from German looting in the Monuments, Fine Arts and Archives program toward the end of the war. The man was an art historian by profession and spoke passionately for nearly an hour about what they had recovered and what they had found in the Merkers mine and else as the war was ending. It was spellbinding, and since I had a lifelong interest in art, this particular speaker drew my attention. At the end of the class, I spoke with him briefly and asked if he would be interested in having tea at a local restaurant. He took me up on the offer, and we sat and discussed his experiences until almost dark. Over the next few months, we had some irregular lunches and meetings and grew quite close. My wife and I had him over to our house for dinner on several occasions, and he cooked for us at his house as well. He was an older, single man who had lost his wife nearly a decade earlier, and over the course of more than 2 years, we became good friends with him. At 78, his health had begun to fail, and over the last few months of our friendship, it became clear to us that his time with us was nearing an end. He had come to our house one last time for dinner and quietly informed us that he had advanced pancreatic cancer. After we dealt with our shock, he smiled and told us that he had enjoyed a good life, had been blessed with a loving wife and a satisfying career. Then he invited us to his home for what he called one last visit. 2 weeks later, we pulled up to his home and were greeted by our friend. He looked as if he had only a few days left, but he was upbeat and in very good spirits. Instead of cooking, he had contacted a very upscale catering service, and our delicious meal was what one would have expected at a 5-star restaurant. We enjoyed 2 bottles of wine that today would probably sell for over a bottle. We talked for hours. His illness notwithstanding, it was a pleasant evening, and it seemed as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He was, in effect, putting his pairs in order and celebrating his few remaining friendships. At the end of the meal, he stood, told us to sit comfortably and that he would be right back. We enjoyed a few more sips of the wine, and I looked around at the artwork that adorned his dining room walls, perhaps noticing for the first time that there were some truly valuable paintings on the walls in that room. When he returned, he was holding a wrapped gift that was obviously a framed painting. Then he smiled and said he wanted to extract 2 promises from us. One was that we were not to open the gift until the next morning. It would be our gift to open after a Saturday morning sleep, and the other was that he had something else to show us which we could never reveal, at least not for 30 years. We were fascinated, and we agreed. I was enthralled by what was happening. The quiet man had transformed into the teacher once more, and as we followed him through his home, he pointed out several works by moderately well-known artists and several minor works near master-level artists giving brief descriptions of the art. As we slowly walked through the house, we arrived at a heavy wooden door with a large deadbolt lock above the usual interior passage lock. He took out a key, smiled once more, and before opening it, he said, "What I am about to show you represents the breaking of an oath I took many years ago." He looked down and then continued. "It is so breathtaking, and everyone thought it had been destroyed, so I just couldn't help myself." He unlocked the door and turned on the lights in the room. There was a single leather chair facing one wall. On the wall, under 2 floodlights in an ornate frame, was an original Caravaggio portrait. It was breathtaking, and I had no words. He broke the silence and walked toward the painting. "Come take a closer look." I followed him to the painting. I leaned in to closely examine the brushstrokes, the colors of the paint, and the small cracks that time had placed on the canvas. Despite being nearly 400 years old, the painting was in good condition. For context, a similar Caravaggio painting recently sold for over $150 million at auction. I looked at him, still with a small, familiar smile on his face, slowly shook my head and said, "I can't keep such a secret. I know I gave you my word, but this is too much." He nodded in understanding, placed his hand on my arm and said, "Then grant me the small favor of at least keeping the secret until after you open your present tomorrow. Would you do that at least?" It was nearing midnight, and I could think of no compelling reason that I had to tell anyone about the painting before then, so I conceded that point. We drove home in silence, and my wife quietly spoke about the evening. She reminded me that I had given my word and that the man was close to passing. The next morning we went down to my den, where the unopened package sat on a chair, waiting. I asked my wife if she wanted to do the honors, and she ripped off the bright red gift paper. It took the breath out of the room. I knew the moment I saw it that it was the real deal. All of the signs were there. The work was clearly that of the artist. There was an envelope taped to the frame containing a short note from our friend, including the original handwritten receipt for the purchase in Paris nearly 60 years earlier. The receipt was signed by Picasso himself, which established the provenance of the work, and as I think my friend intended, proved that it had not been illegally obtained. I called him. The phone rang nearly 10 times before I hung up. He had no answering machine, and this was before cell phones had made their way onto the scene. So we drove to his house. When we arrived, there was an ambulance in his driveway and 3 police cars were parked on the street in front of his home. Sometime during the night, after we had gone home, our friend had ended his life with a massive OD of his pain medication. I spoke with one of the police officers and told him that there was something we needed to see. After the ambulance left and they eventually let us into the house, we led the officer to the room where the Caravaggio had hung. The door was open, and when we turned on the lights, I audibly gasped. The painting was gone. And in its place was one of those velvet paintings of dogs playing poker. On the chair was a small card with my name on it and one line. "Enjoy your gift."